The woman sitting beside me in my Uber whispered that the driver had killed her, but I was alone in the back seat. This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about the passenger who warned me where my driver was taking me. I ordered a ride a little after midnight. I had been at a friend's apartment and she offered to let me stay, but I only lived 20 minutes away. The driver's name was Daniel, gray sedan and a license plate that matched. He barely looked at me when I got in, and I sat behind the passenger seat and gave my friend a quick wave through the window. Daniel pulled away, and for the first few minutes, nothing happened. And then I noticed him looking into the rearview mirror a lot, but not at me, at the empty seat beside me. He kept glancing at it and then quickly looking back at the road. After the fourth time, he asked, "Did you bring someone with you?" I thought he was joking, and I said no. His hands tightened around the steering wheel, and then he looked at the empty seat again and asked, "Can you see her?" I sat up straighter. "See who?" He shook his head. "Nobody, never mind." I checked the route on my phone, and we were still heading towards my apartment, but the estimated arrival time had increased by 6 minutes. A moment later, Daniel turned onto a road I didn't recognize. I told him the app said he had missed the exit, and he said there was construction ahead and he knew a faster way. And then a woman whispered beside me, "Don't let him take you across the bridge." I turned so fast that my shoulder hit the door. The seat beside me was empty. Daniel looked into the mirror and his face had gone pale. He asked, "What did she say?" And I didn't answer. The seat beside me looked darker than it had before, and then I realized the fabric was wet. The entire seat looked as if though someone was sitting with soaking wet clothing. Water dripped onto the floor, and I reached for the door handle. It wouldn't move. The lock was down, and I told Daniel to stop the car, but he kept driving. I said I wanted to get out immediately, and he looked at the empty seat again. And then he said, "She always starts talking when we get close." My phone lost service, and the map disappeared, but I could still see the blue route line before it went blank. We were heading towards the river, towards the bridge. The woman whispered again, "He won't stop for you." Her voice sounded closer now, right beside my ear. I asked Daniel who she was, and he ignored me. I kicked the back of his seat and told him to pull over, and he accelerated. The streetlights became farther apart as we left the populated part of town, and the river appeared ahead of us. I could see the bridge lights through the windshield, and Daniel started speaking quietly. At first, I thought he was talking to me, and then I realized he was apologizing to the empty seat. I didn't mean for that to happen. The wet spots spread across the upholstery, and water ran beneath my shoes. The car began to smell like mud and something metallic. I looked into the rearview mirror, and a woman was sitting beside me. I could only see her reflection. She had long, wet hair hanging over her face, and dark bruises circled her throat. She wasn't looking at me, she was staring at Daniel. I turned towards the seat, and it was still empty. In the mirror, she remained there. Daniel refused to look up, and he kept his eyes fixed on the road and said, "You were supposed to get out of the car." The woman answered, "You locked the doors." His entire body flinched, and he could hear her too. Daniel told her it had been an accident, and he said he panicked. He said he thought she was dead before they reached the bridge. The woman slowly turned her head toward me, and in the mirror I watched her lift one hand and point toward my door. "When he slows down, open it." I pulled the handle again, still locked. I told her I couldn't. She looked towards the driver's seat, but Daniel was crying now. He begged her to stop. Frost began forming across the inside of the windshield, and it spread to the passenger side toward him, turning the glass white. Daniel switched on the defroster, but nothing happened. The frost thickened until he could barely see the road. He slowed down, and the lock beside me lifted. I grabbed the handle. Before I opened the door, Daniel looked into the mirror, and for the first time, he saw the woman clearly. He screamed, and I pushed the door open and jumped. The car was still moving, but slowly enough that I hit the shoulder and rolled onto the grass. Daniel slammed onto the brakes several feet ahead. I stayed on the ground, too afraid to move, and the open rear door hung over the road. Water poured from the back seat, and then the door slowly closed by itself. The woman was no longer beside me. She was sitting directly behind Daniel, and this time I could see her through the back window, not only in the mirror. Daniel stared at her reflection. She leaned forward until her mouth was beside his ear, and the car pulled away. It continued towards the bridge, and I ran in the opposite direction until I reached a gas station. I never found out what happened after that. I just know that woman could have kept me inside the car with her, but instead she let me out before he reached the river. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
I grew up with a poltergeist, and it's only now in my 40s I appreciate just how unhinged that is. In the summer of 1990, my family, me, my parents, my older sister, and Sadie, our German shepherd, moved into our new home. A completely unassuming, mid to late Victorian, mid-terraced house in the north of England. I was only 5 years old, yet still remember it all in vivid detail. The property was not in great condition and had really bad subsidence with sloping rooms and doors which would never stay open or closed depending on the orientation within the house. The neighbouring property had been empty for some time, and the gardens completely overgrown and overspilling with old furniture. For the first year or so, everything was fine. Fully unpacked, rooms redecorated, the house was finally a home and all of us content. That being said, it was in the process of stripping out one of the bedrooms that a large brown stain was found on the floorboards. Nothing was made of it at the time. That was until the empty house was sold and a young family of 5 moved in. Then everything changed. It was during a conversation between my mum and the woman who had moved in next door that she confided that when she was home alone, she'd hear a voice. This voice would repeat a word over and over again, and that word was mutilated. And this was the only time the woman mentioned anything, and from then on, she point blank refused to acknowledge anything out of the ordinary and would not engage in any conversation relating to weird goings on. Thankfully, at that age, I was too young to know what mutilated meant. From then on, life at home grew increasingly unnerving. All the hands on the wall and carriage clocks, you gotta love the 90s, would go in reverse and never work properly. Batteries would need to be replaced. Clocks would be replaced. The problem would persist. In the morning, it would be noticed that ornaments had moved around or one had been found smashed. Naturally, I'd be held accountable and told that ornaments were not toys. Yet it wasn't me who had touched them. Items like remote controls or glasses would go missing and be found in places like inside a freezer drawer, and my parents would be questioning their sanity. We then started to notice a presence, which is incredibly difficult to put into words. This entity was invisible but could be felt moving around the rooms and would appear without warning and make its way from bedrooms, across the landing and down the stairs to then go back up again. It felt like when you've walked into a room that's filled with tension, but condensed down into a being. If someone was in a room upstairs, we would shout, "It's here!" And moments later, the other person would confirm it had come into the room. I'd be sent to bed and slept with the lights on and my door fixed open and Sadie on guard, given it would often enter the room at night. This presence would move freely around every room of the house, bar one. This being the bedroom where the stain was found. You could be stood in the doorway of this room and not feel a thing. Lean forward a couple of inches over the threshold and be overwhelmed with the presence as if it stood facing the doorway itself. Then the violence started. There was an occasion when a kitchen drawer opened and a screwdriver rose into the air before then flying towards my sister.
Jesus Christ.
Chasing her out the room. Another time we were sat watching TV with me sat cross-legged on the floor when a framed photo came away from the wall, levitated in place for a few seconds mid-air before whizzing across the room and smashing into the side of my head. My parents were devoutly religious and would just say, "Pray and God will protect you, it can't hurt you." After that incident, I beg to differ. One of the funnier incidents was when my uncle and auntie had visited one Saturday morning for a brew. Suddenly the dog yelped and ran out of the room whimpering. Then the kitchen door slowly started to open. Again, this door was always closed due to the slope of the house. To have the kitchen bin, say 50 litres volume bin, slowly float into the room, 3 to 4 inches off the floor, and gently place itself down in the centre of the living room rug. My uncle and aunt ran out of the house and straight into the car. Another time, my uncle had brought over my dad's class photo, which had been placed on the bedroom dresser. One day, it was found with a large tear through the middle of it. And that same week, they found out that one of their classmates had been killed in a construction site accident from debris falling.
Oh.
The rip only went through one child, stood on the back row, and it was the man who'd just passed. It was likely around this time that my parents had the house blessed by a priest. Around the same time, the elderly lady next door but one passed away and the house sat empty. Everything stopped. No presents, no floating furniture, nothing. We finally had some sense of normality, but naturally that house was then sold and a new family moved in, and immediately the haunting resumed. I feel the most shocking occurrence was, as the title suggests, the don't panic incident. Myself and my friends on the same street, including those who lived next door, were all sat around our dining room table playing the board game Don't Panic, a simple game of answering trivia set to a timer. I was keeping score with a notepad and cards set out in front of me. It was at this point one of the girls told me I was having a nosebleed. I went to wipe my face, but there was nothing there. She pointed down at the table, and there were drops of fresh blood splatting over the pad and cards. We looked around at each other and saw no blood. We then all looked up, and to our horror, drops of blood were forming in thin air and dropping down onto the table.
Oh my God.
We screamed, which alerted my parents to run into the room, and we all just watched in silence as it continued to happen. My dad checked upstairs to make sure nothing had been spilt, but no signs of anything. Yet there was no stain on the ceiling because these drops were just appearing from nowhere. My neighbours all ran home, and they never came over again after this, and we realised that these drops were directly under the stain that had been discovered years before. We had the house blessed for a second time, although this still did nothing to stop things from happening. I'd hear a muffled voice sometimes talking from the corner of my bedroom, which, when I shouted stop, it replied no, with such force it was like a gust of wind, and I ran so fast out of the room that I fell down the flight of stairs in a panic. It got to the point where none of my friends would visit. Family would have to be chaperoned upstairs to the bathroom because they were too scared to go alone. Even the family and friends who were cynics would come over and leave within the hour because of how the house felt. Eventually, enough was enough, and we moved. By this point, we'd lasted nearly 17 years. My parents sold the house for $20,000 under value to get rid of it. It was bought to let, and any time we passed by in the following years, it was often up for let because people didn't stay long. It was many years later when I tried to Google the house that I discovered the 1921 census for the property. Turns out a man was registered as having died there, and he was a lodger. Could it be that this soul still resided in that row of houses and just wanted some space to itself? There was never any issue when a property was empty, so maybe he just lodged there, given the opportunity until the house was reoccupied, forced then to return to my home, where he died. Was that blood stain, was it his? How did he die? I don't know, and I still look into it. But regardless, I've grown up to discover just how messed up a childhood I had, and that this was not remotely normal.
I've told a lot of scary stories in my lifetime, but stories like this tend to chill me to the bone. If you're new here, my name is Sparrow, and at night we tend to get spooky out in the woods or wherever there is some spooky activity, and this is my first episode of my series called Sparrow After Dark. So grab your favorite cozy hoodie or your favorite cozy blanket and settle in for another spooky Appalachia story. This story comes from someone in our community named Anthony. Hey Sparrow, my name is Anthony, and I've been following you for a while now. Me and my cousins love watching your content, from the spooky woods all the way up to your paranormal spooky barns. This story actually takes place in North Carolina in the Smoky Mountains with me, my two cousins, and my uncle. Every weekend we would go to North Carolina in the Smoky Mountains to our cabin. Me and my uncle and my two cousins decided one night that we were going to go take the canoe out in the middle of the lake. This was a normal event that we would do every Saturday night whenever we went camping. But unfortunately, we noticed as soon as we got to the lake, something just seemed off. It wasn't only the fog rising off the water making everything spooky, but it was also the noises of nature that we could hear walking around us. We were all so spooked out that it pretty much got to a point to where we almost changed our minds and turned around and put the canoe back on the rack. But us being us and the little daredevils that we were, we decided, of course, let's go out anyway. and that's when I realized that this may have been a bad idea. As we were unloading the canoe and putting it into the water, we started hearing what sounded like footsteps walking around us in the leaves. At first, we didn't think anything of it until we started hearing the sounds of scraping, kind of like the sound that deer antlers make when they're scraping their antlers on the trees. And now my uncle wasn't somebody who generally got scared. He's somebody that normally makes fun of us when we get scared. So we started to get a little paranoid when he ended up being the one to get very scared. That being said, my uncle did carry a firearm with him, so because of that, we thought that we were safe. So we lowered the canoe into the water, we all get in, and we start rowing out to the middle of the lake. And that's when my uncle said, "All right, everybody, get your fishing poles ready." We're rowing the canoe into the middle of the lake. My uncle decided to bait his line and cast his first line. As we're waiting there patiently for him to reel it back in to recast, that is when we heard the sounds of those footsteps walking around us again, and the leaves were crunching louder and louder. I looked at my uncle and I said, "Hey, something isn't right here. I really think we should take the boat, row it back in, and get back up to the cabin." My uncle turned around and looked at me and said, "I think you're right." As we all start panicking and we start rowing the boat back towards the dock, that is when we heard the sound of what sounded like a very heavy creature running through the forest. Of all the years that I've known my uncle, I have never once known him to say faster, faster, and start rowing the boat as quick as we can, because I can tell by the look in his eyes that he was very scared. As we're rowing the boat faster to get back towards the dock, we were not even out there for 10 minutes, not even that. We were rowing the boat faster, and you can hear the sounds of what sounds like trees literally falling over next to the lake. At that point, we all start screaming and we all start freaking out, and my uncle is screaming at us to row even faster. Get the canoe all the way back to the dock, and we were so scared that we ended up just leaving it in the water. All jumped onto the dock and started running back towards the cabin. And as we were running back towards the cabin, you can hear the sounds of logs and sticks breaking. And as we heard those breaking noises, once again, you can hear the sounds of old rotten trees falling over, as if whatever was chasing us was really big. I have never ran so fast in my life, and I have never heard my uncle start to cry like he did that night. As we are running back towards the cabin, you can hear the sound of footsteps creeping up behind us, as if whatever this thing was bigger than us and running faster than us. We finally reached the porch to the cabin, and that was when we ran inside and we slammed the door shut. We all looked at each other in a form of panic, and that's when I looked at my uncle and I realized that he, the fearless man, was actually crying. At that point, all of us were actually crying because we were so scared. The worst part about this is when I asked my uncle, "What do you think that was?" he looked me dead in my eyes and said, "You don't want to know." That moment scared me more than anything, because it made me feel like that he knew something that we didn't, and he didn't want to scare us because we were only teenagers. I can tell you that ever since that night, my uncle has only been back to that cabin one time, and he refuses to talk to me about whatever that was that night. And the scary part about this is that he hasn't been the same ever since. I wish I can give you a better ending, Sparrow, but that story has always terrified me, and you are the first person I've ever had the guts to tell. Fortunately, but unfortunately, the story actually ends just like that. But to be honest with you guys, that story scares the crap out of me, because I don't know how y'all would feel, but I have been in many scenarios when I'm running through the woods, as a lot of you know when you're watching my live streams, that there is a lot of things that run up behind me and you don't know what they are. And there is nothing creepier than when something runs up behind you and you can hear it, but you can't see it. But of course, you guys, if you want to, please send me any spooky stories that you have to the email up at the top or the one that I'm tagging down at the bottom. They do not have to be about the Appalachian Mountains. They can be anything. But I hope you guys enjoyed our first episode, and thank you, Anthony, for sending your story in. And as always, guys, I hope you enjoy, from here on out, my series, Sparrow After Dark.
Deputy Sheriff. My partner and I responded to a home invasion call that left both of us questioning what we saw. This submission to Spooky Scary Storytime was submitted by someone who wanted to be called Jay for the story. It's just his initial. And he says he's been a sheriff for the past 13 years in the rural Southwest, though he did not specify exactly where. Living and working out there, he said he's heard his fair share of ghost stories and stories about things that just can't be explained by simple logic. But he believes that there are logical explanations for most of these things, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's bad lighting, or just lack of sleep. But his story fits none of these explanations. If you're new here, this is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series of listener-submitted, allegedly true stories about the creepiest things people have ever experienced. Jay says he and his partner responded to this call a few years ago, and they were both working the graveyard shift at about 2:30 in the morning. Dispatch aired a call from an elderly caller, and she sounded scared. She was whispering, and she reported a possible home invasion and said that she heard somebody walking around in her attic. He says he and his partner were only a few minutes away, and so when they pulled up to the house, they noticed it was an older house at the end of a dirt road, and there were no other houses within a half a mile, but the porch light was on and the front door was locked. Knocked and the homeowner answered, and she was inside with a firearm which she had not discharged. She said, "I haven't seen him, but I think he's still up there. I've heard movement in the attic for the last half hour or so." And so Jay and his partner did what they've done 100 times. They cleared the first floor, and then they cleared the second floor of the house. And then Jay ascended the ladder into the attic with his partner covering him. It was not a working light, but they noticed with their flashlight that no insulation had seemed disturbed. There were no footprints. There was nothing that indicated that a person was in the attic. All that was up there were some old boxes, and so after determining that there was no disturbance in the attic, they were about to head back down when they heard a noise directly above them, and it sounded like it was coming from the roof. Jay and his partner immediately went quiet and began to listen closer, and they determined that this was not a small animal. It sounded like someone that was taking slow and deliberate steps above their heads. He says they radio dispatch and advised that they would be checking the exterior of the home because they now believed that someone was on the roof. The pair exited through the front door and split up like they usually do, and Jay says he took the driver's side of the house and his partner took the passenger side. And as they walked around the house, he said about halfway down the house, he caught movement along the fence line. He caught sight of someone standing near the back corner of the house just watching him. He hit him with the flashlight, and for about 2 seconds, he thought he was looking at his older brother. He said he had the same beard and was wearing the same jacket that he always wore, but his brother lived 3 states away. He said he remembers actually lowering his guard for a moment because his brain was insisting that this was his older brother. But as he looked at him, he noticed that this person smiled. And the smile was all wrong. It was too wide for his face. He said it wasn't insidious, but it was like someone who was trying to figure out how smiling worked. Light from the beam of the flashlight flickered for just a second, and when it came back on, there was no one there. There was no footsteps in the mud. There was nothing to indicate that anyone had been there to begin with. He thought adrenaline had gotten the best of him, and they finished circling the property and found no one. There were no footprints in the mud or the soft dirt around the house, no ladder. There wasn't even a way to get up on the roof, and there was no suspect. The homeowner apologized over and over for wasting their time, but they reassured her that she had done the right thing and they cleared the call. It wasn't until almost an hour later that things got strange because Jay and his partner were back at the substation writing reports, and out of nowhere his partner asked, "Can I ask you something stupid?" And he's like, "Yeah, what's up?" He said, "Did you see someone standing outside?" And Jay looks at him and he's like, "Yeah, I thought I did for a second." He got quiet, and then he said, "Well, who do you think it was?" And Jay said that question caught him off guard, but he said, "For a second, it looked like my older brother." Jay says his partner's face changed immediately, and he reached into his pocket and he took out his wallet, and out of his wallet he took a picture of his father, and he said, "This is who I thought I saw standing outside the house." He said, "I thought I saw him standing behind the shed, but my father died 8 years ago, but he was wearing the same clothes that he's wearing in this picture." Then he said something that made every hair on Jay's neck stand up, and he said he smiled, but something was wrong with his smile. It didn't look right. Jay said he was too caught off guard to even tell him at the time that that's exactly how he described what he saw in his head. But neither of them had seen the other side of the house, so they compared body camera footage. There was nothing. Both of their footage showed empty yards and their flashlights sweeping along the fence line, but both of them seemed to react at the same moment to nothing. He says dispatch logs showed their reactions within 15 seconds of each other. So whatever made them stop together. It was strange, but Jay says he was not going to let it get in his head, and so he sort of forgot about it or tried to put it from his mind. But a few weeks later, things got strange again because he mentioned it to one of the older deputies. He had gotten no further in sharing his story than mentioning the address when the deputy stopped him and said, "Did either of you see anyone you thought you knew?" Jay says he remembers feeling a chill when he said this, and he said, "How do you know that?" And apparently they were not the first to answer calls at that address. They were also not the first ones to leave with a story that they couldn't put into a report. It's been years, but he still thinks of it as the one story that he can't explain, and that still gives him the chills. So what do you think they saw? Jay says he was prompted to submit this because his daughter is a fan of Spooky Scary Storytime, so he asked me to say hi to Emma. I have a few other good first responder Spooky Scary Storytimes I've been sitting on, so stay tuned for those.
If you don't like scary stories or anything paranormal and you want a good night's rest, go ahead and scroll. This is not the page for you. I have another paranormal scary story submission that was sent via email, and we're going to read it right now. The email reads, "Hi, my name is Daisy, and this is a story that I have that happened just a few months ago, and I hope that you post it. I was at my aunt's and uncle's babysitting one of my younger cousins. It was my brother, my little cousin, and myself in the house. Nobody else, and they don't have pets or anything. My aunt and uncle were going out on a date for the night for a few hours and said that they would be back around 11. My brother went downstairs to watch TV, and I was upstairs in my cousin's playroom where I always stay when I have a sleepover. His playroom, to get there is a hallway, and you go down the hallway, there's a bathroom, then his playroom. He is scared of the dark, so I shut the door to get into the hallway and shut the door to the bathroom and turned on all of the lights in the room, bathroom, and the hallway on. He was 4 at the time, and it was around 8:30, so he was tired, and I just put on a show he likes to help him fall asleep. He couldn't, so I took him down to go get a snack. We were gone for a few minutes, and when we got back, the bathroom light was off, and the door was slightly opened. At this point, I didn't want him to worry, even though I was terrified, so I went to the basement to ask my brother if he had went upstairs. He said no. I thought that he was just joking or messing with me, so he came upstairs to check with me. We got there, it was still the same, and we checked, but there was nobody in the bathroom. I turned the light back on and shut the door. My brother went back downstairs, and I tried to put my cousin to bed. He couldn't fall asleep in the bed I made for him, so I let him stay in mine with me, but he was still wide awake. All of a sudden, he sat up, and I was about to ask him what was wrong, but I heard the door to the hallway open. I went to check, it was wide open, and when I was up, the door to the bathroom opened and the lights turned back off. I took my cousin, I ran downstairs because I was terrified. I went down and told my brother what happened, and he seemed a little scared now too. Called my aunt to tell her what happened, and as the phone was ringing, my brother, myself, and my cousin all heard voices talking from the playroom, which was right above us. My uncle decided to check the cameras they have to see if anybody had come in, but there was no one. My aunt told us she was on her way, but while we were waiting for her, we heard footsteps in the kitchen. We waited a bit, and the footsteps gone away. We were so scared somebody was in the house robbing it. My little cousin didn't understand what was going on, but he was so scared somebody was going to hurt him. Then we heard 3 loud thumps from right above us and started to panic, looking for places to hide, right as my aunt came down. Once she had us all calmed down, we asked her if she had checked out the playroom. She said that she hadn't, and we had looked in the house afterwards, and where we heard the thumps. Where we heard the thumps was a couch, so in order to make that noise, something would have had to be under it. To this day, the door still opens sometimes, but that was the most scared I've ever been in my life. First of all, thank you, Daisy, so much for sending in your story and trusting me to share it. I 100% believe you. I actually have a story on this page that is very similar, where my mom, my sister, and I were having like a girls' movie night. My dad was asleep in his bedroom, brother was gone, and we also thought that somebody broke into the house. We literally thought that we were going to be like unalived. My sister, because I was little at the time, had to hide me under my parents' bed, and there was no one in the house. So 100% believe that. I'm curious, do you know any history or background on the house? Anybody who is watching, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to send in your story for a chance for me to read it on here, send it to the email above. As always, thank you for watching. Love you, bye.
My name is Shaya, and I'm from the Philippines. This happened last year during our break time. Me and my friends were talking about abnormal things happening in our school. I didn't really believe anything they said about paranormal happenings around the campus until one of my classmates showed me this. I don't have an exact date for when this photo was captured, but I know for sure there was nobody in the school that late at night. My name is Marina, and this happened to me during a school trip on the night of November 16th through 17th of 2024. 4 other girls and I were assigned a room where we'd be staying overnight. Earlier that evening, one of the girls had brought 4 face masks to do for fun. I wasn't feeling well, so I decided to stay in bed for the rest of the night. The other 4 girls put on the face masks and started taking selfies together. One picture in particular caught my attention immediately. There were only 4 face masks, and I had never gotten out of bed. Yet somehow, the photo appeared to show 5 faces.
The person that sent me this story called it my spooky New Hampshire story. We have another New Hampshire story. Who knew there were so many spooky things happening in New Hampshire? By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our glitch community about glitches in the Matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. Hi. I saw your video on TikTok on Thornton, New Hampshire, and it made me want to share my own story about Northern New Hampshire. I can assure the person who sent you that story is certainly not alone in their strange experience. My boyfriend and I are very outdoorsy. We love to hike and fish for native trout in the northern half of the state. We always tried to venture to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire at least twice a year. With all the time we've spent in the woods in that town, we've had a fair share of weird and sometimes endearing experiences. Nothing like our last experience, though. We have not returned since. Oh my God. If they were going twice a year and then they stopped going, something fucking bad must have happened. We always stayed at the same Airbnb to a point where the hosts were familiar with us. It was quiet, clean, and we always felt safe there. Our last trip was a literal wash. Most of the week it was raining heavily to the point most of Pittsburgh was flooded. The final full day we had, the sun came out and we were able to spend a whole day hiking and fishing like we'd planned to do the whole week. My boyfriend found a spot far outside of the main part of town close to the Canadian border that he thought would be perfect for native trout fishing. So we packed his truck and we headed there. The spot that he'd found was a little pull off where we had cut through a field to get to the wooded area with the stream. It wasn't a marked off trail or anything like that. Due to the flooding, the mud went up to our knees, so it wasn't suitable to hike unless you were wearing waders like us. We were entirely alone, which typically I liked, but something about this spot felt off. I felt immediately uneasy and my brain felt foggy and the woods were dead quiet. That's bad. When it's dead quiet, that is never good. To me, it genuinely felt so ominous, even though it was a pretty spot. My boyfriend went around a bend into a stream to fish, and I sat at the edge of the water trying to pull myself together. Again, I'm no stranger to the woods. I've heard possibly every strange sound that an animal can make, but out of nowhere, I heard, as clear as day, a deep, evil, human laugh like it was right next to me. I immediately ran upstream and told my boyfriend we had to leave, so we did. We spent the remainder of the early evening fishing in the main part of town on a different river. We packed up pretty early since we had to go home the next day and headed back to our Airbnb. My boyfriend made dinner once we got back. I wanted to read while he cooked. I asked him for his truck keys since I'd left my book in there. He told me that the truck was unlocked and he didn't know where his keys were. We looked all through the house and started panicking a bit when we couldn't find them. It wasn't like him to lose something, ever. Especially something as important as keys. We started looking outside. We checked on the porch, which was connected to the house by a glass slider. We checked the porch steps that led to the driveway and even in the lawn. We'd looked everywhere for hours. Since my boyfriend's truck is the type where the key doesn't actually go in the ignition to start, we double-checked if, one, we could start the truck with the keys close by, which we could, and two, if we could drive off without said keys, which it seemed like an alarm would go off in the truck if we did. We tried starting it, and it didn't. It told us that the keys were out of range. At that point, it was late and dark and raining again, and we had no way to get home the next morning. We started walking back to the river on the off chance that we dropped them there and didn't hear the truck warning that we were leaving the keys. As we were walking, I had the same ominous feeling I did in the woods earlier, only now it was dark and raining. I was able to convince my boyfriend to go back to the Airbnb and told him that we'd wake up early to find his keys then. When we got back, it was about 2 a.m. and we just went to bed. The next morning, we woke up and headed to the slider to start looking in the front yard for the keys again. To our surprise, the keys were in front of the slider. They were completely visible from inside the house and incredibly hard to miss going in and out of the house as we had done a dozen times the night before. I can say with absolute certainty that the keys were not there the night before, and with their proximity to the truck, it should have started when we tried that. I still have no idea what happened that whole last day. I'm not usually a timid person, but something about it just felt very off, and it still freaks me out now. The end! Okay, I think that the keys were obviously taken for a reason so that they would have to stay and they would go look for them and go back to the spot to look for them. Thank God the person that wrote the story had a bad feeling and was able to convince her boyfriend, no, we need to turn around. Like, I am not comfortable doing this, because I wonder what would have happened if it was fucking 1, 2 in the morning and they're venturing back to the spot where there was a fucking evil ass human laugh and no other sounds. Like, that's not good. Good on you for listening to your intuition, boo. And so glad that your boyfriend listened to you. I'm glad that you guys are okay, but how scary. Thank you so much for sharing.
There's a very well documented case of a skinwalker that comes out of Phoenix. Now, there was this guy who came forward and he said that his mother lived next to like a couple 100 acres of desert. And he said, he was often afraid because she lived alone, but she did not want to move. Well, one night she awoke at like 2 in the morning and her dog was barking at the door. So she got up and figured he needed to go outside and use the bathroom. So she puts him on the leash and she starts walking him around the backyard. She said that's when she heard what sounded like her husband's voice coming from out in the desert behind some brush. She heard the voice say, "Are you there? Are you still there?" And she said, like, she called out her husband, Ingram, like, is that you? Is that you, Ingram? And she said, the voice responded back, "Yes. Now come out here into the desert, like come behind this brush. Just come on." And she's like, no, Ingram, you are deceased. And so she took off running with the dog back into the house. Well, for several weeks, she would have something knocking at her door, banging at her windows. When she would go to answer the door, there would be no one there. She would hear laughs and screams coming from outside. And she, eventually told her son about what had happened. And he come over to the house a couple times, and he couldn't find anything or find anyone. They reached out to the police. The police set up patrols. They couldn't find anything or catch anyone that was harassing this old lady. And then she said one night there was a really bad thunderstorm. And after the thunderstorm had stopped, she hears a knock at the door. She goes to answer it, and when she opens the door, she's surprised to see her husband, Edgar. And she was so excited that she almost gave him a hug, but then she was like, wait a second, he's been deceased for, a couple of years now. And she said it looked like Edgar, but it was just like his face was just, something was off about it. It almost looked rubbery, kind of like the skin, was hanging off the cheekbone. And she said this thing that looked like her husband said, are you here still? It's me, it's Edgar. Like, let me in the house and give me a hug. And like, she was like, no, Edgar, you're deceased. You're not real. Like, you're not here. And she said, he kept saying, just let me in the house. Come on, I am real. I'm your husband. And so she said she pushed him away because he moved in like close on her. And as she pushed him away, she said he felt like ice cold. He turned and then ran off into the desert. So immediately she calls her son, who he calls the police. They go out there, they search the area. They couldn't find anything. Now, her son started to think like, okay, maybe she's like losing it as she's getting older, because like we never see anything. And this, sounds pretty crazy what she's explaining. Until one night he happened to pull in front of her house, and he said he sees this man standing next to her door. And when he locked eyes with him, he could see that he had these bright yellow eyes. And he said this man turned, took off running towards the desert, but he got down on all fours just like an animal.
Let's read a scary Reddit story. I am addicted to reading people's paranormal encounters on Reddit, and I want to read you some of these scariest stories that I've come across. Today's story takes place in Nebraska, and it is super creepy, so get ready. This story takes place around 2018 or 2019. I, 25 female, at the time was 18 or 19 and living in Nebraska where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in Nebraska, but it was essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big houses right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, and a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions. Plus, his parents were super cool and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was a ton of fun, even though I'm quite scared of the dark, so I would just not go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to and from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long, winding, two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you passed one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while, and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night had perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down and listening to music. It was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam on my brakes. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch black road with thick forest on both sides, and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 3 or 4, a tall, slim woman, an average height man, a child, short hair but couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing and couldn't see their face, maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a fucking stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered but not super nice. They also were not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street, in the same direction I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking or had their own music playing. They didn't.
The hair on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all, at the same time, stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road and booking it in the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my head the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting onto a main road, and luckily never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell the story, I get one of 3 reactions. People immediately think I'm fucking crazy, they think I'm lying, or they have had something similar happen to them. I really don't care if anyone believes me, honestly. It was, and still is, the creepiest thing to have ever happened to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the shit out of someone, a distraction for an attempted robbery or assault, or it was something way more sinister. This story scared the shit out of me because I grew up in a rural area too, and the idea of driving on one of those dark back roads and a family just walking in the pitch black, appearing out of nowhere in front of your car is horrifying to think about. I think I would have done the same thing and just backed up and turned around and sped out of there. I also think this story is really creepy because it's still kind of a mystery as to what this person saw, and I don't know what's scarier, if it was robbers or if it was ghosts. What do you think this person saw in Nebraska?
When I was 6 years old, something grabbed my foot and pulled me down the stairs of my basement. If you're new here, I'm Krista, and on my account I tell spooky stories either submitted to me or found on the internet. Today's story was submitted anonymously. When I was 4 years old, I suffered from severe night terrors. I would wake up screaming and completely stiff. My mom eventually took me to a sleep therapist who prescribed medication to help. The medicine stopped the night terrors, but it triggered sleepwalking instead. We lived in a 2-story house with my bedroom upstairs. Almost every night, I would sleepwalk all the way down to the basement floor. The basement stairs were old wood with open backs, meaning you could reach through the steps from underneath. When I was 6, my family was redoing the basement after a bad storm flooded it. One day, my dad asked me to go down and grab a tool for him. As I walked down the stairs, something grabbed my foot and pulled hard. I flew down the remaining steps, landing with cuts, scrapes, and a bump on my head. Right after I hit the ground, I heard someone laughing. I thought it was my older sister playing a prank on me, so I turned around and yelled, but nobody was there. The basement door at the top of the stairs was shut, and there was nowhere else for anyone to hide. I sat there frozen, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I just grabbed the tool and ran upstairs. It has been 18 years, and I still drive by that old house sometimes. But after we moved out, my sleepwalking, night terrors, and the constant feeling of someone lying in bed next to me completely stopped. This sort of thing was what stopped me from going down to the basement in my house when I was a kid, because I always thought that someone was gonna grab me and push me or lock me into the basement. But I'm really glad that you moved out, and I hope that you have had no other experiences like this since. Thanks so much for submitting this story. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can. And I will see you in the next one.
They reported seeing multiple tall, slender humanoid figures positioned around their vehicle. I found this one in the wild, and this story comes from 3 friends in December of 2017 who were near a wooded area in Saylorville Lake, central Iowa. They experienced hours of unexplained tapping and screeching sounds and apparent movement among the trees. A man named Lon submitted this report, and it is wild, and I want to know what you guys think these things were. So it was December 14th and 15th, 2017, and Lon says that he was with 2 friends when he had a strange encounter with multiple humanoid figures in the woods. He said they saw them at night from their car. They were extremely frightened and barely spoke while this was all happening. The only reason that they were there the second night was that they had already experienced something unusual in the same area the previous evening, which to me, that would be a reason to not go back. He said during the first night, they believed several people were watching them from the woods for multiple hours. However, whatever was out there appeared to communicate by tapping on trees, almost like in some sort of code. Lon also says they heard noises that sounded similar to screeching. He even said at one point a light turned on nearby and the screeching and the tapping abruptly stopped. And then they did not hear anything for almost 30 minutes after. He goes, we eventually called another friend, and while one of us whispered into the phone, we suddenly heard the communication sounds begin to start up again. He goes, we whispered for him to hang up immediately, and as soon as we said that, the noises stopped again. They stopped before he had even hung up or pulled the phone away from his face. They also saw several silhouettes walking away through the tree. Okay, so the following night, they all returned to investigate, because they're crazy. He said, what we saw sent chills up and down our spines and also on me. He goes, we did not immediately discuss what we had seen. Instead, each of us independently wrote down a description so that we would not influence each other, which is a really good idea. When they compared their accounts, the descriptions were nearly identical. Now, he says the only significant discrepancy involving the figures was their estimated height. Two of the friends believed they were approximately 7 to 8 feet tall, and the other witness said that it was closer to 6 feet tall. One of the friends even got out of the car and walked toward the edge of the woods to listen more closely, which is crazy. And after seeing those eyes, none of them would ever do something like that again. Okay, so now they break down the humanoid's appearance. He said there was more than one figure, first of all. They were positioned to their right, to their left, and directly ahead of them. They were extremely slender and tall, with hunched or hunched back postures. Their bodies appeared to be brown. Their eyes produced orange-yellow glow. It was almost like a reflected eyes of a cat in the darkness. However, they could not see any obvious light source around them. Like, where was the reflection happening from? He said their movements were precise and quiet, and even though dry leaves covered the ground, each figure appeared to have two primary locations that it repeatedly moved between, although there were several additional stopping points along each path. I love how freaking descriptive this is. He said when one of us went outside the car, heavy breathing could be heard coming from the freaking woods. It sounded as though the figures were breathing heavily through their nostrils, and the footsteps seemed to mimic the witness's movement. Kind of like they only occurred when the person was walking or looking back towards the car. They also noted that the figures also appeared to use the trees to block the reflection from their eyes. And whenever any of the friends spoke, everything in the woods became completely silent. He goes, one of the strangest details was the way they seemed to place their feet. Okay, I don't know why, but this really bothers me. Like it like hits a nerve. Like it creeps me out a lot. Okay. He said they did not appear to walk heel to toe. They were moving in the opposite. In other words, they seemed to step toe, then to heel. He goes, the entire situation was bizarre and deeply frightening. And that's kind of where the story ends. He says that they've never returned back to the location. Lon has since moved to Texas, and he says he doubts either of his friends are going to even ever go back. But he said, I still wonder what we encountered during those 2 nights. And yeah, me too, because there are so many different freaking cryptids and new accounts are popping up all the time. Of course, my first thought goes to Rake, which is one of the things everybody describes as tall and slender, but they're always saying that it's a gray colored thing when these were brown. Also, the communicating by knocking and screeching, that's a new one for me. And the weird way they stepped What awesome detail. So let me know, you guys, have you ever heard of a creature like this? What is this cryptid? What could this cryptid be? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you have your own cryptid story, obviously you got to share it with me. If you're interested in Creepy Storytime merch, feel free to check out the link in my bio. And if you're new here, follow for more Creepy Storytime.
This photo was taken at my old house. Ever since I moved in, I had always had an eerie and heavy feeling there, but I never thought too much about it. One night, the power went out on my entire street. I remember using my phone flashlight to navigate my house, and I ended up taking a few photos as well. It was meant to be a joke, kind of to prove to myself that there was nothing in my house. But then, I captured this. My mom sent me this video that she recorded last night. It's taken from our backyard, looking into our house. This picture of my son is a little old. When I was pregnant, I was told I was having twins. Not long after that, I was told that one of the babies didn't make it, and my body had absorbed it. We were visiting Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine, Florida, when this photo was taken. I'm happy to know that my son's twin is with him as his guardian angel.
Texas is a hotspot for black-eyed children sightings. Now, the first sighting goes back to 1996 in Abilene, Texas. And since then, there have been hundreds of documented reports of people encountering the black-eyed children in Texas. Now, there was a very terrifying encounter just outside of Abilene, Texas, in a place called Albany. There was this 80-year-old woman named Helen. Now, Helen lived alone in the same house for 40 years. She said one night she was alone watching TV when she heard a knock at the front door. Well, she gets up, she starts thinking to herself, like, who would be at my door this late at night? I don't think I should open it. So she just ignores it. But then the knocking starts getting louder, and then it turns into banging. And whoever this is, they are banging extremely hard on this door, so much so that it's actually vibrating the house. So she walks to the door, and she says, go away. I'm not interested, like, leave, it's too late, leave my house. But then she hears a voice. It's her son. He says, Mom, it's me. Let me in. So she's like, Brian, what are you doing here at 11 o'clock at night? So she opens the door. But to her surprise, when the door opens, she sees these two children. They look around 11, 12 years old. They're dressed in all black. There's a little girl. She's got a black dress on. The young boy has some kind of black suit on. And she says, what are you doing at my door at 11 o'clock at night? And they said, please, help us. We're lost. Let us come inside. And she's like, what do you mean you're lost? And we're lost. Can we use your phone? Let us come inside. So she said, why were you banging on the door? Why didn't you just use the doorbell? And both these kids, they look kind of puzzled, like they had no idea what she was talking about, like they had no idea what a doorbell was. So she felt bad, and she thought maybe they were in danger. So she opens her door and she lets them in. So she says, look, I'm going to go find my cell phone. I'm going to call for help. We'll figure this out. So she goes to get her cell phone, and these kids run off. And they start going into different rooms around the house. And they're jumping on beds. They're screaming. They're making all kinds of ruckus. They're breaking things. And so she goes, from bedroom to bedroom, following them around. And she starts saying, like, you need to leave. You need to get out of my house. And they start laughing at her. They say, Helen, we are never leaving. She said, look, I don't know who you kids are. It's time to go. And she said the one kid, the boy, he grabs her arm, which his hand felt ice cold. And he looks her right in the eyes. And that's when she realized he had these solid, big, black eyes. This was not a boy. This was something else. So she runs out of the house, goes to the neighbor, tells him what's going on. The neighbor goes over to her house. But when he goes inside, there's no one there. And he says to Helen, are you sure? Like, this happened, like, it's late. Were you tired? Maybe you had a dream. She goes, no, I'm telling you, these kids came into my house and there was something off about them. And that's when the neighbor notices these little footprints leading directly towards the woods.
This photo was taken inside of an old manor. The person who took it propped their phone up on a fireplace so that they could take a photo of themselves. It wasn't until they sent the photo that they noticed there appeared to be somebody else in the image. What's especially unsettling is that they were completely alone in the house. I don't know what this is. This was taken by my indoor Ring camera. You can see on the camera that nobody walks in or out of the bathroom, but there's definitely something in there, and it appears to be peeking at the camera. In this photo, the three people that you see are my two brothers and my sister, but behind them, there's a figure that shouldn't be there, as they were the only three people inside the house. I'm submitting this photo in hopes that somebody who sees it might be able to provide me with a logical explanation. I know exactly what it looks like, but I really don't want to believe that's what it is.
Snacks in hand, the vibe is set, and once I start, don't eat too much because you gotta stay fine, but come on, besties. Yeah! Hey, bestie boo, I missed you. What are you doing? You know it's time for a snack, right? So go ahead, go get it, and go get your gardening essentials too. So for the sake of this story, let's call this guy Caden. And the story actually happened right here in Jersey. So a few months prior, Caden had graduated college. He had an amazing job even before he graduated. But even with the job, he was making a lot of money because he also owned his own business in college. So Caden is doing pretty good for himself. So as a graduation gift, he buys himself a house. He buys himself a house right in Sayreville, New Jersey. He's super excited. He's super proud of himself. He's single. So yeah, he buys the house. He doesn't tell anybody he's buying the house until like after everything is done. And so he tells people. So his family members, of course, they're very religious. They're like, hey, we all got to come and pray over the new house. So he's like, yeah, of course, you guys need to come. So his parents set up like the entire family plus church members on a Sunday after church to come to Caden's house and basically like pray over him and pray over the entire house. So boom, that happens. He goes to church. They make the announcement in church. Everybody's so happy. Everybody follows him after church. They go to his new house. They had food. They had drinks. It was a really, really good time. Everybody prayed over him. Everybody prayed over his new house. It was great. Fun was over. Everybody goes home. Now, he hadn't officially moved in yet, but it is his house. You know what I mean? So he decided like this was such a good day. My family was here. The church members was here. We had a prayer session. Like everything was great. I kind of just want to spend the night right here in my new crib. So he goes over to Walmart. He buys himself a couple of sheets and he buys himself an airbed. He's like, I'm going to spend the night right here in my new place. Like, you know, I'll furniture it later. I'll furnish it later, but you know, something's telling me to just stay in my house tonight. And he doesn't tell anybody that he's gonna do this. As far as everybody else that was there is concerned, he hadn't moved in yet because when they got there, the house was pretty much empty. Only thing they had was a few chairs for the guests and like paper plates and you know. So boom. Everybody leaves. He's getting ready to leave. Everybody thinks he's getting ready to leave, but really he's just going to the store to get him the airbed and stuff like that. So cool. The night comes. He has his iPad and his phone with him. He got his air mattress. He is super happy. He's spending the night at his new crib. So he's laying there, he falls asleep. And as he's sleeping, he gets woken up by some people talking, which is kind of weird because the neighborhood where he bought the house is not really like a loud neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like there's an HOA and everything like that. So he wakes up out his sleep like, who's talking? It kind of sounds like they're coming from inside the house, but like outside at the same time. But he's inside the house and there's nobody here, so he goes to look outside. He goes outside his window and he sees people there. He sees a whole bunch of people surrounding his house, but he can't see these people's faces. They're close enough, so he should be able to see it, but he can't see their faces. There are people with no faces surrounding his house. And at that moment, it didn't click yet. It didn't click until as he's looking outside that window, there is a car that drives by. And there are tons of people on his front yard, like a lot of people. So when the car drives by, this is a white ass neighborhood, and you guys know white people nosy. So when the car drove by, he visibly saw the lady driving the car just drives past. Now, I know you're wondering, yeah, of course she's gonna drive past. But with the amount of people that was on his front lawn, that lady should have been like, what the hell is going on at that house? That lady probably would have called the cops and everything. And it was at that moment when that car drove by, he realized, oh, this is not real. I mean, of course it's real, but it's like these is spirits, like. And he's from Kenya, so this is not new to him. So immediately he starts praying. And once he starts praying, the voices, the people talking, starts to get louder and louder. And when the voices started to get louder, that's when he realized the voices were praying too. But they weren't praying to God. They were praying in a language that he couldn't even understand. And it wasn't tongues either. So the louder the voices got, the louder he started praying, to the point where he's like praying and screaming at the top of his lungs. He is screaming at the top of his lungs while holding his ear, because the louder he got, the louder they got. And out of nowhere, it stopped. It just stopped. He looks outside, nobody's outside anymore. So he's low-key like freaking out. So he immediately calls his parents. He tells his parents everything that just happened. His parents already know what's up, so they're on the way. They got there with anointing oil. They got there with salt. They got there with all the necessary things that they needed. So when they get there, they get to praying. And you know it's different when it's like your parents' prayer. And the entire time they're praying to return whoever is sending that for their son. Because honestly, it's expected. Their son just bought a house, you know? So whoever tried to try their son and sent that kind of energy towards their son, it would go back to them 10 times fold. And when I tell you they sat there and prayed for hours, they prayed until the sun came back up. Cool. The sun comes back up and they're finally, settling down, and they're all just talking. His mom gets a phone call. So she answers the phone, and it's his aunt, the mom's sister. She answers the phone, and the aunt, let's call her Kata, I don't know. Kata tells her, you guys need to come to the hospital right now. They're like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, why do we need to come to the hospital? So apparently at 5 a.m. that morning, her son went into a psychotic break. He was perfectly fine 1 second. She was in her room sleeping, and the next she just hears her son in the room screaming off the top of his lungs. And when she went to see what he was screaming about, there was nothing in the room, but the son was absolutely going batshit crazy, to the point where he physically looked different. Not only was he going crazy, but he had a bottle full of herbs that he was throwing everywhere all over his room. If you know, you know. So once she said that, they all put it together. It was him. It was his cousin. Mind you, his cousin was just at the house earlier with everybody else praying over the house. And so the mom immediately was like, oh yeah, we need to talk. So they all leave. They didn't even go to the hospital. They went to the aunt's house. Obviously, the aunt was at the hospital, but they waited there at her house until she came back from the hospital. And while they were there, they went into his room, and they found a whole lot of stuff in that room with Caden's picture. I ain't gonna say what it was, because y'all like to try stuff. But yeah, when the sister came home, they explained to the sister exactly what had happened that morning. And the sister was like super shocked, because it's like, that is your cousin. Why would you do that to your own cousin? It was so bad to the point that they had to take him back to Kenya. Like immediately. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. They just wanted to lock him up in a psych ward and basically do nothing and pump him with medication. But they know what was really happening. So they took him back to Kenya, and he's still in Kenya as we speak. But yeah, that's the story, y'all. Don't forget to let me know what you were eating. And if you want to prevent yourself from things like this, go ahead and click that link in my bio and get your ebook. And don't forget to go to my YouTube channel to watch my story time in long form. I just posted a new video. And don't watch nobody else's, because they're making money off of me. All right, bestie? Okay, bye. I love you.
His brother went to hike the Appalachian Mountains, but when he came back, it was no longer his brother. Welcome back to another episode of Creepy Corner with Ken. Like always, if you have any stories that you want me to share on my page, you can send it to the email that's in my bio, but let's go ahead and get into the story because it is absolutely terrifying. He writes that his brother, who we're going to call Kevin, has always been an outdoorsy guy. He loved hiking, camping, all those types of things. He was known as a kid to go off into the woods and just stay out there for hours, and he would have the best time doing this. He said that being out in the woods and with nature just always brought him peace and helped him not be as stressed. But unfortunately, a few months ago, his brother Kevin's life just really spiraled out of control. He had lost his girlfriend, he had lost his job, and he had lost his apartment all in 6 weeks. He ends up moving back in with his parents and his brother, and they were really just trying to be there for him and to help him get back on his feet. He said it was really sad to see his brother like this and that he could just tell the spark that Kevin once had in his life was just completely gone. He said he noticed that his brother wasn't really sleeping and he was barely eating. One night he went into the kitchen and saw that his brother was just eating a slice of cold pizza, which was more than he had in a few days. And his parents bring up to Kevin that maybe it would be a good idea for him to go camping, go hiking, just get back to nature since that always helped him, that would just be a good thing for him to go do, that he just kind of shrugged it off and just went back to his bedroom. However, that next morning, Kevin comes out of his room and says that he's decided that he wants to hike the full Appalachian Trail. It's going to be a long trip, that he thinks that is what he needs to do. Mom was a little hesitant about how long he would be gone. His dad disagreed, saying that this would be a good thing for him and that he's been in the woods enough, he has hiked enough, that he knows what he's doing, he will be fine. And for me personally, I've heard way too many scary stories about the Appalachian Mountains, so the thought of hiking this whole thing and staying the night in the Appalachian Mountains sounds terrible. His dad just said to make sure that he texts them or sends them a picture or something every few days just so that they know he's okay. He spent the whole next week buying stuff for his hike, getting all the equipment and things that he was going to need on this trip, got him registered for his hike, and they even bought him a plane ticket to Georgia because that is where he was going to start the trail at. It writes that they were all so excited for his brother and that Kevin for the first time seemed overly joyed to be doing something, but had he known what was going to happen to his brother, he would have never let him leave. He said at first everything was normal. Kevin was sending them pictures of different scenery and even pictures of him with a thumbs up and saying that he loved them, missed them, but that he was having a really good time. However, a few days later into the trip, things started to change a little bit. He was still sending pictures every few days, but the tone had definitely changed. Normally he would send a picture and say that he loved them. He just started sending a picture and would say proof of life. And then slowly but surely, they were no longer receiving texts every few days. It was very far and few between at this point. But they assumed that because cell service was kind of hit or miss in the mountains, that he would reach back out to them when he got service. About a month and a half into his trip, they realized that they hadn't heard from him in over 2 weeks. I feel like it wouldn't have taken me 2 weeks to get concerned, but okay. So they call the authorities and give them everything that they know about where he last was based on when he last had messaged them. However, as far as the police were concerned, they just assumed Kevin intently decided to go off the grid and that sending a rescue team could cost thousands of dollars and could be such a waste of resource, and that the best they could do was put a notice out for all the ridge runners and that if they saw Kevin to call the authorities. Literally useless, but okay. However, one night him and his parents were eating dinner when all of a sudden they heard a really loud knock on the door. When they opened it, it was Kevin, but was it really Kevin? Kevin had never looked worse. They noticed that his lips were dry and cracked. His gum had a layer of blood around them. He was so thin as a rail. He had lost over 30 pounds. His clothes were disgusting, caked in mud and debris. His mom got up, ran to hug him, and that the smell was so bad that they all were gagging, but they were just so happy to see him. He said that for the next few days, Kevin was just acting super weird. He was extremely hungry, just gulping down whole things of food without even chewing it. One morning, he only stopped eating breakfast after he had eaten a whole loaf of bread, so much bacon, and 2 dozen eggs. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I've been very hungry before, but that's a lot of food. He said that Kevin was barely speaking to them at all, and that if he did, it was very short, things like, yeah. And that it took him about a week after coming back from his trip to talk to them like a human. However, they noticed his voice had changed somehow. There was like another voice talking the same time he was talking, as if whatever was inside him was trying to harmonize whatever he was saying. And he says that one of the worst things was the smell. No matter how many times Kevin showered, he just smelled so bad and the smell wouldn't go away. Now, he says that he could have ignored all of this and would have understood that it was just from him being out in the woods for several weeks alone and he was just trying to get back to normal. But What happened on this night, he would never forget. He writes that this night he was really having trouble sleeping, and so he was just wide awake when all of a sudden he heard the back door creep open. Now, he writes it from his viewpoint that he could see into the kitchen, into the backyard, and what he saw would haunt him forever. He saw his brother perched up on his hands and knees, twitching over and over again. And all of a sudden, he just puts his head straight towards the ground. And he writes that he honestly thought that his brother was having a seizure, so he runs out there to go help him. But when he went outside, he saw that Kevin's head was buried deep into this dead cat's body, and that he was just chomping down on this thing, and that the cat had clearly been dead for a few days now, and that he even pressed his thumb into the cat's skull and popped out an eyeball and ate it. So he runs back inside, terrified, screaming, closes the door and locks it, runs into Kevin's bedroom, and that's when he realizes that in his bedding is a bunch of dead carcasses. There were rabbits, squirrels, mice, just so many decayed animals in there. So he runs to his parents' room screaming and is saying that they need to call someone. He doesn't even know who they should call at this point. As he turns around, he sees Kevin just staring into the kitchen window with blood dripping from his mouth, with his head tilted at an angle that he said is not physically possible. Then all of a sudden, Kevin just lunged at the window and it totally freaked him out, and he screamed so loud, ran to the hallway just crying and shaking. His dad went outside to see what was going on, but Kevin was gone. You couldn't have paid me to go outside to see what was going on. I've seen enough, actually. They called the police, and the police just said it sounded like he had a mental health crisis. I think it's a little bit more than a mental health crisis. These police are worthless. He says that his brother went on the Appalachian Mountain Trail and never came back, and whatever that was, wasn't Kevin. Whew, I hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Creepy Corners with Ken. That was definitely terrifying. But like I said at the beginning of this video, if you guys have any stories you want me to share on here, you can send to the emails in my bio. But y'all make smart choices and no more hiking in the Appalachian Trails, okay?
This is one of those scary stories that just kind of sits with you, so let me tell you about it. In the mid-1960s, the Pritchard family moved into a house in Pontefract, I think that's how you say it, England, and very quickly things started getting weird. It was just small things at first, like little things would vanish and then reappear in different places, places they wouldn't normally be. And at first, the family thought that this might just be like childish games, but it very quickly turned sinister. But things started getting sinister when the family started feeling watched in the home, and then large pieces of furniture started being moved around or even thrown across the room. Then there was like standing water in the house, and the family didn't know where it came from. And even when they called plumbers, the plumbers weren't able to see where this water came from. And then it got even worse when they started hearing voices, specifically a deep male voice. At first, it seemed like it was just whispering here and there, which is still really creepy, don't get me wrong. But then the voice started getting louder and it started mocking the family and also threatening the family. The voice also started talking to the family about things that had happened that it wouldn't possibly know about, like things that had happened to the family that it wouldn't know about, which is really, really strange and very scary. Eventually, this voice would identify itself as a monk who had been executed centuries earlier. Now, the history of this town is that it was built around this castle, and there is some really dark history surrounding this castle. So it's not a stretch to think that there were some executions that happened there that probably weren't great. So it could easily be that this monk had been executed and is now haunting this home. And things just got more and more sinister as it seemed as if this ghost or this poltergeist was feeding off of the fear from the family. Of course, they were scared because these things were happening in their home. But then it became even more terrifying as it started physically attacking the family, specifically the teenage daughter. Apparently, she was thrown off her bed and scratched. There were several times that the neighbors would call police officers because they could hear sounds of destruction and screaming coming from the family's home. And when the officers arrived, they often saw this paranormal activity happening themselves. This often went into police records, with one police officer even being attacked or struck by a flying object that came from seemingly nowhere. Eventually, the city council would get involved because there were so many police reports coming from this house. They looked into everything, including the wiring, the structural integrity of the home, like everything, and nothing was found. They even looked into the history of the monk that this poltergeist claimed to be, and there were no historical records that definitively prove that this is what was going on, but things just kept getting stranger. People did, or clergymen did, come and try to bless the house, but it seemed to only make things worse. The attacks would intensify during prayer or the blessings, and eventually the family just had enough and requested relocation.
There were several ghost hunters, I guess, that did come to the house, and they claim to have recorded unusual activity, including knocking seemingly coming from nowhere and other activity. And since then, people still feel this really eerie or like sad or just overwhelming feeling when even walking by the house. And currently, this is one of the long-standing paranormal mysteries of our time. So, what do you think? Is this actually haunted or is this all a hoax? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more spooky things.
Hello my icon legend queens, welcome back to another Jessie's Paranormal videos. If you don't know me already, I'm Jessie. I love talking about paranormal. It's my favourite thing to do, but sit down with a cup of coffee and a cup of tea and let's get into it. Well, this brings back some very traumatic memories in my life, but here it goes. It was 2011, I was 16 years old at the time. I used to play basketball. Our school team went to play a tournament in some small town called Punab. All teams would stay in the school and we were allotted into different classrooms. It was a late night and me along with a friend sneaked out to just get some air. The school was located outside of a town. There was nothing nearby. We sat down beneath a tree. We were enjoying the breeze. I could still remember the figure I saw. A thin, tall, lenient figure in dirty white clothing, and the face was like a sick child. The face looked about of a 3 to 4 year old child. I panicked, we ran. My friend told me he didn't see anything, but we ran. As I panicked, so did he really. Tournament happened 2 days later. We returned. That eerie feeling stayed. I developed pain in my traps and shoulder over time all day long. I remember my ride back from the tournament. My shoulders were killing me. Upon returning, I couldn't study, practice or gym due to the shoulder pain. We consulted many doctors, ortho, neurons, but couldn't diagnose the issue. Muscle relaxants helped, but only temporarily. With time, the pain proceeded, but many family members and friends noticed a change in my posture. My shoulders were getting down, my traps were almost gone, my shoulders sinking. Again, the doctors were clueless. I also told my parents about the figure I saw. My dad insisted to get some horns and pujas done. We got it done, no change. Then my dad forced us to visit at Tranik Baba in some remote village. We travelled for some 7 hours. I remember there was 2 or 3 families before us. As soon as I entered, the Titanic went into a frenzy, chanting things to me in a separate tent. He described the exact same thing I saw at my parents and told them it was sitting on me, like on my shoulders, legs hanging like a child that sits on their parents' shoulders. It was scary. I've been alone so many times during this period, alone with this thing. I was having an anxiety attack. They did a hijack for what seemed like an hour until I passed out. When I woke up in the car on the way back, still scared by the way, but the pain was gone. It took years for me to sleep alone again. I'm still afraid of things. I do not go out at night, never travel alone unless there's an emergency. I don't like talking about it. If you like this video, give me a like, follow, share, everything like that, because TikTok shadow by me. I love you all so much, and I'll see you in the next one.
Want to hear something scary? This is a part 3 of the series, and I see your guys' comments. I know you're impatient. Kendall, when are you going to read my story? Kendall, when are you going to read my story? I have a lot of stories, okay? And frankly, I am picking the best ones. If I can't read it, then I'm not going to be able to post it. So when you submit your stories to me, please check the grammar at least. If you're reading it, and you think about if you've never heard the story before in your life. If you read it, would you be able to understand what's happening? I can edit them, but some of them I really can't edit. So just double check your stories. Anyway, as per usual, the commenter's name will be on the screen. My name is Vin. When I was younger, I lived in a haunted house and would often find myself staying home alone. I was only around 8 during this time. When my parents were gone, I would usually stay in the living room watching TV and such, but I'd often hear walking around the house or movements that just didn't make sense, with no one else being in the house. So a few days later, I ended up home alone again, and I decided to stay in my room this time and do my homework. I had opted to keep my door locked, just out of paranoia, but I remember hearing people walking up and down the stairs. I knew it wasn't my dog because she was in the room with me. This occurred over and over again, and got increasingly worse. The next time I was home alone, I heard my mom call, "Vin, I'm home," from downstairs. I opened my bedroom door and went to call back, but I felt a hard touch on my shoulder. No one was there. I got a very bad feeling and shut my door, immediately locking it, and ran to hide in my bed. A few minutes later, my mom actually arrived back home from work, and I didn't tell her what happened. Years went on since this happened, and I am older now, but the paranormal activity still persists. A year or 2 ago, my dad was working on fixing up the house with the intention of renting it out. While he was busy doing this, I was trying to talk to the ghost. I unfortunately got no answer, and decided to move on to the next thing to entertain myself. I noticed the battery on my phone was low, so I plugged it into the charging port. But when I turned away, the charging block flew out of the wall, almost hitting me, and landed on the other end of the room. And to make matters worse, this one happened at night in the dark. My dad likes to fix up other houses as well, so there were many instances of this happening while he was doing that. One day, he was working on a different house 2 hours away, and so we decided to go with him and stay up in a camper by where he was working. One day, I was in the camper watching a scary video when I heard my name being called from outside the window, and pebbles tapping against the camper window. I thought it was my brother, so I got out of the camper, but I couldn't see him, so I walked inside the house my dad was working on. When I stepped inside, I immediately felt uneasy, but I yelled for my brother thinking he was playing a game. But when I found him, he was on the complete other side of the house, and he said he had no idea what I was talking about, and seemed genuinely confused. Another night in the camper, I woke up in the middle of the night only to be met with a pair of red eyes outside the window adorned by a tall dark figure. I laid back down and didn't move for hours. I eventually did notify my parents of the things I was experiencing, and it seems I wasn't the only one. My mom's friends said that there was a theory about the spirits of a woman and a man haunting the house. My mom said one morning she woke up to a man screaming in her face. But the worst thing about my story is that I can still feel someone watching me. I'm never alone anymore. This is horrifying. To me, it definitely sounds like a mimic situation. The ghost copying your mom's voice, that sort of thing. It's feeling like a mimic or multiple spirits possibly haunting your house. I wonder if you researched your house, was it built on a burial ground? Were there any rituals that were reported being performed? Anything like that, I'm very curious. Before I start this next story, I do want to give a kudos to the commenter, because this is very well written. This is one of the best written stories I have received. So kudos to you, good job, this is a good story. Okay, I'll shut up. Back in 2016, when people all over the country were reporting creepy clowns standing on roadsides, there was a neighborhood where everyone stopped going outside after dark. Me, a 16-year-old named Tyler, was walking home from my friend's house just after 9:30 p.m. The streets were quiet. As I turned onto Maple Road, I noticed someone standing under a flickering streetlight. It was a clown, not moving, not waving, just standing there. I looked away for a second, thinking it was someone playing a prank. When I looked back, the clown was gone. My heart started racing. I hurried home and locked the door. Before going to bed, I looked out my bedroom window. Across the street, the clown was back, standing perfectly still. The next morning, there were muddy footprints leading from the sidewalk to my side of the house. My parents assumed it was just neighbor kids. 2 nights later, however, I heard 3 slow knocks on my bedroom window. Knock, knock, knock. My room was on the 2nd floor. I froze. After several minutes, I finally looked outside. No one. The police searched the yard but found nothing, except a red balloon tied to a backyard fence. Over the next week, neighbors began seeing the same clown. It never spoke, it never chased anyone, but only watched. One family installed security cameras. The footage showed the clown standing at the end of their driveway at 2:14 a.m. It stayed there for exactly 12 minutes without moving. Then, at 2:26, it slowly turned its head toward the camera. The next frame glitched. When the video came back on 1 second later, the clown was gone. Police increased patrols, but never found anyone wearing a clown costume. After the story spread online, people assumed it was another prank inspired by the 2016 clown sightings. A month later, the reports stopped. Years passed. The cameras have been taken down by this point. Then in 2024, the family who had recorded the video sold their house. As the new owners were moving in, they found an old Polaroid photo tucked behind a loose board in the attic. It showed the front of the house. Standing at the end of the driveway was the same clown. On the back of the photo was a handwritten date, October 12th, 2012, 4 years before the 2016 clown sightings had even begun. I like this story. I am a little biased because of the 2016 clown craze that was going on was something I was pretty obsessed with. I actually want to do some story times on that just because I remember when it happened. I mean, I was terrified, but at the same time I was kind of like, I've always been obsessed with horror and scary things, and I was like, I was just watching nonstop YouTube videos, everything about it. I was so interested in it. This next story is also one of my favorite ones that I've read. I really felt myself being almost tugged into the story. When I was 7, holy shit, great start. When I was 7, my 2 older siblings told me about the Charlie Charlie challenge. They said it was just a game, but they were telling me about the spirit Charlie Charlie. I was a little scared. However, given that I was only 7, I wanted to be cool like them and included because they were older than me. So that night, we set the pencils up and the paper and sat together saying the chant, "Charlie, Charlie, are you there?" There was no answer, but my sister was recording and wanted to look cool, so she blew on the pencil to make it look like it said yes. The next day, me and my sister had plans to go down to the lake and then go to dinner with our grandma. It was mid-December at the time, so the lake was frozen solid. When we were walking down there, just messing around, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, and saw this man behind a tree staring at me. His eyes didn't look human. They were dull and red. I pointed it out to my sister, but she said she didn't see him. The man walked up to me and told me to jump in. I told him no, and that I didn't want to go in the freezing cold lake. But I suddenly felt a force hitting me in the chest, and then it went black. When I opened my eyes, I saw my sister trying to pull me out of the cold lake. She told me I was mumbling something, saying Charlie over and over again, but I don't remember it. All I felt was lightheaded. We ended up going home after that. I thought I might have just hallucinated it and that nothing I saw really happened. But after the next couple of days, strange things started occurring. My lights began flickering. Stuff started moving around my room. My dolls would giggle in the middle of the night. This went on for 7 years. I tried telling my grandma, my sister, and my brother, but no one believed me. I ended up still feeling a really dark presence wherever I went, and every night I woke up to a man standing above my bed. A week after the lake incident, I woke up again, and the man was beside my bed. But instead of just watching me like he usually did, he spoke the words, "You weren't supposed to survive the lake." But he didn't just say it once. He said it over and over and over, like it was a chant. I started screaming. I still see him, but he stopped trying to speak to me. He just sits there and watches me now. This is a true story. Very good story. I feel like this is something you could genuinely find on like creepypasta. Like, this is good. This is written well. I almost hope it's not true, because that sounds horrifying. And I hope you're okay. I hope this creepy man, I don't know. Man, that's horrible. Hope this creepy man goes away. Ew. Also, if it's Charlie, I thought Charlie was like a 7-year-old, not like a 50-year-old man. Ew. If you would like a chance for your story to be in my next video, write it in the comments or DM me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye! Stop, Markiplier's gonna sue me for copyright.
For 3 years, I refused to let my foot hang off of the bed because something would always grab my ankle. When I was around the age of 12, I was terrified of sleeping, and it wasn't because I had nightmares, it's because every few weeks, something would wrap its arm or hand around my ankle. And it always happened the same way. It would be in the middle of the night. One of my foot would sneak out from underneath my blanket and just be hanging there, and then I would always feel 5 fingers wrap around my ankle, very cold at that. The first few times I convinced myself that it was just like a nightmare, right? Until there was one night where my ankle got grabbed and I instinctively kicked my foot and I actually hit something under my bed. So much so where it moved. I screamed so loud that my parents came running to the room and my dad checked underneath the bed for me. They didn't find anything, so they were convinced that I was just having night terrors.
It got so bad that my parents actually got me a new bed frame, and it was the kind where they had like drawers on the bottom, so there was no space for anything to go under the bed. Now, the grabbing stopped after that for almost a year, until I spent the night at my grandparents', and they had this like dark wooden bed frame, and there was plenty of space underneath that bed. I went to sleep, and then I woke up around 2 a.m. and it was freezing cold in the room. I noticed that my foot was not under the blanket, so I went to go pull it up to put it back under the blanket, and that's when I felt it, a very slow brush against the bottom of my foot. I jumped out of the bed before I even realized what I was doing because I was half asleep. My grandpa came into the bedroom. He searched underneath the bed, and I felt so ridiculous because I felt like I was too old to be scared of what was underneath my bed. He even flipped my mattress. Nothing was there. And eventually, I started to kind of forget about that this was happening. Like, I'm talking, it took a couple years. So years passed, I kind of forgot about it, and then my younger brother hit the age of 12. And he randomly, we were eating breakfast one morning, and he looked at my mom, and he's like, "Mom, when do you think I'm gonna stop getting, like, grabbed under the bed?" The room went completely silent, and my mom looked at me, and I looked at her. We never told him about that experience that I had, so there's no way he would have known. And so she just kind of looked at him and she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Sometimes, like, if my foot is off the bed because I'm hot under the covers, something will grab my ankle." And he said it so casually. My parents replaced his bed the very next day with the same bed frame with the drawers underneath. And to this day, we still bring it up here and there around like Christmas time and we talk about it. And we don't know if it's just some weird family superstition or if there is actually something that lives in this house or lived in the house with us that lived under the beds.
So, as it turns out, the Vanishing Hitchhiker or the Haunted Road is a legend that is not just in the United States, but all over the world. I came across this one that is in the UK, and it is the Bluebell Hill Phantom Hitchhiker. Now, there is a real story that supports the evidence that this could actually be a haunted road, and it's a tragic story. In 1965, there was a young woman who was set to get married. The night before her wedding, she was out on the town with a couple of her girlfriends, her last hurrah, her bachelorette party. On the way home, there was a two-car collision where her and her friends were involved in an accident. One person passed away at the scene, while the other girls were in the hospital for several days before passing away. This really was a tragic accident that really did happen, and since then there have been several paranormal sightings at this exact location, with several people staying at a local bar that is really near the accident location, and then going up the road to see if they can have a paranormal experience. Several people have claimed that while they're driving down this road, a young woman will run out into the street and make direct eye contact with them before a collision happens. But there is never any damage to the vehicles, and there is never any evidence that somebody has been hit. There is no evidence of a collision at all. 4 years after the accident happened, there was a man driving down the road, and he claimed that he saw two pedestrians walking towards him. As he got closer, they vanished. He kept driving down this road, and as he continued down, he saw the exact same pedestrians, the two people walking towards him, but this time he drove right through them. Then, in the early hours of the morning of July 13th, 1974, a bricklayer was driving down the road when a young girl jumped in front of his car. He felt the impact. He felt that he hit this person. And then when he got out of the car to see what had happened, there was a young lady laying in the middle of the road, and she had several cuts and bruises all over her body. He tried to flag someone down to get help, but no one would stop. So he knew he needed to get some help. So he laid a blanket over her and then went to the police station to try to get some help. When they returned, only the blanket was there. There was no girl, there was nobody in the road, just the blanket that he had used to cover her up. They did search for her. They used dogs, they searched by foot, they looked everywhere, but there was nothing that they could find of this girl. There was no blood, there was nothing, no scent of her, nothing. And so people really started to believe that this might be the ghost of the young bride who had lost her life. Then it would happen again with another man saying that he was driving down this road when he saw a young woman step in front of his vehicle. He said that they made direct eye contact before they made impact, and she went over the car. Once again, they found nothing. And this would happen time and time again with no one knowing where this woman went. So what are your thoughts on this? Is this road really haunted by a bride who never made it to her wedding day, or is it all just a hoax? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more spooky things.
One of you guys submitted the story. I'm going to tell it in the first person, but it did not happen to me. To start off, this happened when I was about 5 years old, and I swear to you that since this happened, it has completely changed the way I sleep at night. Growing up, my father was in the military, which meant that we had to move around a lot. For as long as I can remember, I have always been able to see things that others can't, to the point that I was even making friends with spirits. But nothing as terrifying has ever happened to me as what happened at my grandmother's ranch. She had a ranch in Corpus Christi, Texas, and at the time, my bed was pushed right against a huge window that overlooked a giant field. One night I couldn't sleep, I was tossing and turning. When I happened to turn around, I look out the window and I see a woman standing in the middle of the field. She was about 50 yards away from where I was. She was a woman with long black hair and a long white gown, just standing there staring at me. She just stood there with the hair blowing in the wind and her dress, and she was honestly really beautiful. Then something incredible happened. Even though she was super far from where I was, she began to speak to me, but it was almost like she was speaking to me right next to my ear. And she says, "You are special, but be careful who you help." Just the moment she said that, it's almost like my fingers snapped. I opened my eyes and I was up for school. Now this continued to happen for several nights. Same scenario, I would wake up in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I would look out the window and I would see her standing across the field. She would speak to me and then I would snap my fingers and it would be daytime again. Then one day the visits just like suddenly stopped until one night I happened to wake up again. Once again, I look out of the window and I see a woman standing there, but only this time it was a completely different woman. This woman was dressed in completely black and she didn't look friendly. And instead of speaking to me softly like the woman in white had spoken to me, her voice was sharp and she let out this loud screech. And right above her were 3 large owls. And I'm talking like humanly impossibly large owls that were just flying around her in circles. On the third night that she showed up, I was honestly too terrified to even look that I decided to close my eyes and just try to pretend that she wasn't there in hopes that she would just like disappear. I happen to have one of my hands hanging off of the bed when out of nowhere I feel these cold, clammy fingers wrap their hands around my hands. I look down and I see an old lady like witch looking hand holding my hand. Tried to pull away, but I couldn't, and then this woman began to laugh, and as I'm looking out the window I can see her laughing in the field. It wasn't until I began to scream at the top of my lungs that the hand finally let go, and when I happened to look back out in the field, the woman in black was gone and so were her little friends. I didn't see her again until years later, but honestly since that night I will never again sleep with my hands hanging out of the bed or my feet, because you never know what's out there just waiting to grab them.
Hi guys, Riley from Ghost in the Garden here. I was gonna record a video tonight, but I'm gonna be doing that probably tomorrow night or recording tomorrow nights in my basement. I was out in my yard getting everything set up because I have to kind of move things around because the garden's insane right now, which yay, abundance, I love it. But I was getting ready, I was getting set up, I have my story ready, and I heard something that I came back inside. So for context, in my garden, we have a privacy fence on 2 sides, a smaller fence on the other 2, and behind one side of the privacy fence is a creek, and on the other side is my neighbor's yard that goes straight into state land. I live in Michigan. I feel like everything creepy happens in Appalachia or Michigan, and so I heard some sound from the creek, but, I kind of ignored it. I hear sound back there all the time. We have deer, we have muskrats, we have all kinds of critters. And I was just getting my lighting set up, and then I heard what sounded like a voice, but I figured it was just far off. I live in a neighborhood, it was probably some kid. And then from the direction of the state land, I heard this awful scream. It didn't sound like an animal, it didn't sound like a person. It could have been me freaking myself out and it was a person, but it didn't sound quite right. And I kind of just brushed it off, thought, maybe there's kids playing. I kept setting up, but I just kept getting this really eerie, like being watched feeling. And I'm not about that. Creepy voice, creepy scream, feel like I'm being watched. I'm out of there. So I locked up the chickens and I ran right back inside, and now I am cozy in my room, in my bed. And I will be reading you guys another story tomorrow night. I've also been sick. My baby and I have hand, foot, and mouth, which 0 out of 10 do not recommend. I didn't even know adults could get it, and so it's not been the best. So I really, really appreciate all your support, even though I have been a little bit more inconsistent. But tomorrow we'll be back. But I promise we'll be getting a story tomorrow, and the consistent posting will be back. I love you guys so much. Bye.
Get comfy, get cozy. Spooky, scary story time. When I was 14, my parents and I took a trip to Los Angeles and stayed in this hotel. We didn't book expensive because we were only passing through, so the hotel was kind of run down. Like the elevator sometimes wouldn't close. We stayed for a day, and it was good, but it was exactly 3:10 in the morning when this thing happened. You know how sometimes you wake up and just instantly know the time, like you have an internal clock? I was right on when I actually checked the time. And I had like this uneasy gut clenching feeling, kind of like I was paralyzed, but I knew I didn't have sleep paralysis or anything like that. It was so strange. We were on one of those higher floors, and there was a community bathroom in the hall. This laughing suddenly started coming from the ceiling, and I was freaking the fuck out because my parents were still asleep. Like resonating through the ceilings and the walls, this really faint childish laughter. I honestly don't know what possessed me to do this, but I went to the window and I opened it because I just had this sense that something wasn't right. I looked to my left and I saw this woman open her window. I could only see that she was wearing like this nightgown and brown hair that kind of shielded her face. It was really dark other than the city lights. And I kid you not, she turned and jumped out the fucking window. I swear to God, she jumped right in front of me, and I heard screaming on the way down. Immediately I started screaming too, and my parents woke up and I told them what had happened. So we immediately went to reception and they called the police. Police got there, went to where I said she had jumped, and found nothing. No body, no anything. They went to the room, a couple down from ours to the left, and it wasn't even occupied. Found out later after we got home that we had stayed at the Hotel Cecil. Scariest situation I've ever been in.
A series of spooky stories, except for it's this bitch in the Lindsay Clancy trial. What the fuck is her actual problem? Now, before I get into this video and start talking about my opinions on this lady right here, I want to make it abundantly clear. I did not hear anything about this Lindsay Clancy lady until a couple of days ago when my client told me about the situation. Apparently, if you didn't know, Lindsay Clancy is a woman who was a wife and then she was a mother of 3. And apparently she was experiencing severe postpartum depression and psychosis. I don't know all of the details of that, but there was psychosis mixed in there. She was on a lot of medication. She wasn't able to be left at home by herself with her kids and all this other stuff. Her husband was there with her, or her parents were there with her. Her husband went out to go get something to eat. He came back and all of the kids were deceased. And she was like on the ground, like had jumped from the window of her home. This is a murder trial. Unfortunately, her children did not survive and she is paralyzed because of this woman right here is the doctor that seen her the night that she was taken in after all of this shit happened. She was the doctor over the case, right? Now, here's the thing. I don't know what the fuck her problem is in a sense of why the fuck do you not want to answer any question? Every single answer that this woman gives is, I don't recall. I don't recall. I don't recall. One thing that also stuck out to me was one thing that stood out to her, this is what she said, was her thoracic injury, but she doesn't know what degree, and she couldn't tell you anything about that thoracic injury. Now, something that has been noted and what the defense lawyer brought up to this woman, the doctor, was that Lindsay's core temperature was 82 degrees, which is like hypothermia. I don't know what level of that, but you're supposed to be at 98.6. Okay, so she's delirious. She's out of it at this point. And he makes it a point to bring that up. And also other people in the videos are like, how the fuck did she get to 82 hypothermic that quickly? Because he wasn't at the store getting the food or whatever the fuck it was that long for her to drop core body temperature that fast. So that's also one of the reasons that the defense lawyer is bringing it up. And he said, okay, so her core body temperature whenever she got to you was 82 degrees. And she was like, I don't know. I would have to see the records. If that's what it says, then yeah. And he's like, okay. So he then goes on to ask her more questions. I don't recall. I would have to see my notes. And he was like, you mean to tell me that you can't tell me anything about this case right here? You knew that you were going to have to testify. They didn't call you that fucking morning and were like, hey, you need to show up here. You knew that you were going to have to go on fucking trial. You knew that you were going to have to go testify on this trial. She gets so fucking snarky and she's like, I don't know all of my cases. Literally, I see like 200 people a month. And he's like, I understand that you're busy, but this is a murder trial. Like, you didn't go over your shit. But then she says she did go over it. But at the same time, she recalls nothing. She's like smirking and she's like pissy the whole entire time. She's like snappy and snarky the whole entire fucking time. Like, this is inconveniencing her. Girl, this is a murder trial. What are we doing? Why are you not doing your fucking job? You do recall. You have to recall. You just said that you reviewed it, but then you said you also don't know all of your cases. But then you said that you reviewed this situation. And also, something as crazy as this, I understand that we're not going to remember everything, okay? We're not going to remember all of the traumatizing things, especially when you're dealing with traumatizing things on a daily basis. But there are certain things that just stick with you. And I can imagine that having to treat a woman who is accused of unaliving her children and then trying to commit self-unaliving, that if you didn't remember all the sticky details, maybe once you got into reviewing your chart and the medical records, it would jog your memory. It would have to. Of course, you're not going to remember exact vitals, but 82 degrees is kind of one of those things that would stick with me. You know what I mean? I had a lady whose pulse dropped to fucking 30 on me. That wasn't a long time ago, but I'll tell you, that will stick with me for the rest of my life because it scared the shit out of me. It's just not helping. Like, it's not helpful. Your job as the physician who was there that night is to take all the details from that night and give the information that you have. This case is crazy. This case is so fucking sad. Anytime you hear about anything like this, but especially when there's kids involved, it's so fucking hard. It's so hard, okay? But whenever you're watching the trial like this, it's like, what's not being told? And why is it not being told? I'm genuinely confused. And you're a professional. You're not the one that's on trial. So why are you withholding information that you do indeed have? There's no way that you don't. I just don't believe that she doesn't recall all of this shit that she's saying that she doesn't recall. Can I please not be the only one that feels this way? I know that a lot of other people in the comments were like, what the fuck is she talking about? Okay, you don't recall this, but you wouldn't classify the gashes on her wrists to be deep. But you can remember that. What about bruises on her body? What about blood? I don't recall. What? Please put your opinions in the comments.
Bro, what's going on around?
Tonight's ghost story is called The Man Who Hated Our Family. And it's been sent to us by Jackie, so a massive thank you, Jackie. Let's get into it. And Jackie says, when me and my husband were expecting our first child, we bought a house together. And from the day we moved in, something felt off. There were old glass doors between the living room and the hallway with amber-coloured glass, and I would frequently see a shadow walk past into the kitchen. At first, I thought it could be a reflection of the light, so I decided to leave the door open and just watch. After a while, I was getting bored, so I cheekily said, if you are living here with us, then just show yourself. Lo and behold, the shadow of what I believe was a man walked right past the living room door and into the kitchen. Me being the curious person that I am, immediately went into the kitchen. Although I couldn't see anything, the kitchen was freezing cold. We had a solid fuel Arga type stove in there, and it was lit, so the room should have been toasty. This went on for a while, and I eventually told my husband, only for him to tell me that he had seen this man too, but was too afraid to tell me in case I got scared. As my daughter got a little older, she used to sit in her cot, looking behind her bedroom door and babbling away. Then she got even older, and she started saying, night night, to the man. But when I got pregnant with my second child, things took a turn. Items started to move, doors started to slam, and we could hear other voices over the baby monitor. There was a heaviness to the house that did not sit well. When my son arrived, it got worse. It was so bad my parents and other relatives wouldn't come to stay in our house or babysit. Mr. Spirit was clearly not happy about our extended family. I don't think he was. She says the icing on the cake was when I was walking down the stairs with my son in my arms and got pushed on the back. I twisted my ankle and managed to save my son from being hurt. We sold up and got the hell out of there. We had lived there for 6 years. We only found out after we left that the grandparents of the family who lived there before us had spent their final years in the house, and that the grandfather had detested the boisterous behaviour of his grandsons. Clearly, he wasn't happy about our son's arrival. I'm glad we left. I mean, as someone with 2 nephews, I get it. But don't be pushing people down the stairs and trying to harm the baby. That is not okay. If you've got a ghost story like this, email me, thedarklingchronicles25@gmail.com. Send me your pictures, your videos. I would love to speak to you, and I'll catch you in the next one.